Thank you so much. I don't think I will be able to answer that question comprehensively in the 12 minutes I have, but maybe I can at least give a short introduction of how it might work, right? Since we already got the introduction, I'm skipping right to the introductory slides. So usually before I'm saying what I'm doing, I'm kind of alluding to the fact that stuff that sounds pretty impossible right now was always in the past when we thought about stuff being impossible, like heart transplantations, right? This is the picture of the first heart transplantation, right? I'm pretty sure doctors and a lot of people would have said back then, putting one heart from a human and putting it into another human sounds pretty impossible. Same for planes, right? Just going a few hundred years back, planes would have been imagined to be extremely impossible. So all the stuff that we use every day today, right, used to be impossible at some point in the past. And of course, if you're talking about longevity and living again in the future and the stuff that was in the short introduction, I would argue, for some of you, this might sound impossible right now, but it might very well become possible in the future, right? And in fact, if you ask people, like, do you like to live longer, then even the very aggressive statement of, I would like to live indefinitely, 26% say, yeah, this is me, right? Doesn't matter if you ask in the US or if you ask in Europe, we did that basically all over the world, and it's always in that ballpark. So quite a few people say, hey, this is actually something for me. And the problem now, of course, is, next slide, please. Oh, well, sorry, well, yeah, that one. When you talk about longevity, right, longevity is a word you might remember that, a while ago, the Time magazine in the US titled, Will Google Solve Death? Haven't so far. The field has been very, very broad has gotten very, very broad from wellness to more high impact things. I'm probably on the scale, like on the wall somewhere there, where it's very moonshotty, it might work, it might not work, but if it does work, it's probably very high impact. Now, when you talk about longevity, you might have heard the word health span, living healthy while you age. And then that's kind of in correlation to, next slide please, to what we call lifespan, actually living longer while being healthy. Some of you might have seen these curves. Basically, the different curves represent different years, meaning the older you get, the sicker you get. But the more we progress, the less sick you get when you're old. So hopefully, a lot of us, when we're 85, we're going to be physically and mentally super fit, but then all these curves still end at the same point. This is where people die. People still are going to die somewhere between 85 and 95, somewhere in that ballpark. Now, arguably, if you're physically fit and mentally healthy at 85, you might want to live longer. That, unfortunately, next slide, please, is a significantly more difficult problem. Because this is biology. And this is not even all of biology. And I'm probably sure you cannot read anything there, and it's much bigger, in fact. We would need to figure a good part of this out to make people live longer. Now, my background is in cancer research, so cancer research has been saying every 10 years, it's just another 10 years. Just give a few more billions. Next slide, please. And in fact, it's not anybody in cancer. There was in 2005, it was called the Director's Challenge of the National Institute of Health, National Cancer Institute, which is part of the National Institute of Health in the US, where the director said, we want to get rid of cancer by 2015. And as all of you know, unfortunately, we're quite far off that. Biology is just really, really, really hard. Now, coming back to the point that once we're 85 and we might all be healthy, we might want to live longer, what to do, right? Next slide, please. And one more thing, a lot of people die every day, right? Like 180,000 about, which is in 10 years about 500 million people. So a tremendous amount of people, where some of them might arguably, not everybody dies at 85, unfortunately. Also people die of cancer at 20, 40. Statistically, that's not super likely, but unfortunately it happens as well. So what could you do right now to give those people a chance, and all of us, maybe, to be around once, whatever the next plane thing will be in 200 years from now. Next slide, please. So the only thing that I'm aware of, and this is why I'm working on that, is kind of bridging this gap. At some point, this very complex slide with biology, at some point we will figure this out. It just might take significantly longer than some optimists in the US sometimes might think. But at some point, I think fundamentally this is possible to figure out. I'm not aware of any fundamental reason why we need to die. At least not until maybe 150 years old, and then maybe there will be new reasons, but definitely not at 80. So what I'm working on is called cryopreservation. Has a lot of open questions still, don't get me wrong, right? It's a bit science fiction-y. You might know the concept from science fiction movies where they put people into these capsules and then fly to the next star, and then, you know, the smoke comes out of the capsule and the people are being brought back. So we do this in reality. Next slide, please. So it's basically, sorry, next slide, please. Okay. So cryopreservation, this is always the pictures I need to deal with if I'm giving interviews, right? And then we always ask, can we please use a different picture, not an ice cube, please? Because everything we do is to not freeze anything. Freezing damages stuff, right? If any of you has put in like some, you know, I don't know, tomatoes into the freezer, you know, freezing damages stuff. If you take them out, they lose structure, they're not great anymore, right? So we cryopreserve. So we cool down to, in the end, negative 196 degrees Celsius. So extremely, extremely cold, but without having ice crystals form. The whole water in the body is replaced against a so-called cryoprotective agent, which is basically a medical-grade antifreeze, a solution that allows you to cool down very, very low temperatures without ice crystals forming and without other types of damage. It's the same technology that you use for in vitro fertilization, like freezing down eggs. It's not really freezing, but of course, colloquially, it's always called freezing. This is what we do, but for whole organs and whole bodies. Right? And then next slide, please. We have medical teams. These are the medical teams that basically pick people up and do the procedure. You need to do it extremely quickly after the heart stops, right? Because otherwise the degradation process starts. There's a saying in medicine that says, you're only dead if you're warm and dead. There have been cases where people died, in quotation marks, or their heart stopped during skiing accidents, and they were for an hour in some ice water without a heartbeat. They've been brought back. They're being revived without any neurological or physical damage, because the cold stops the cells from dying on a cellular level. And of course, arguably, we put this to the extreme, where if you're being cryopreserved for 20 years or 50 years or 100 years or 200 years, it doesn't matter. There's no more degradation, there's no more changes. Next slide, please. This is the team, kind of in a training. Next slide. This is where people then are. On the right side, this is an underground research institute in Switzerland that I've built over the last years, where then people, it's basically a medical institute where underground you have large storage. And then arguably, next slide please, you wait it out until we figure three things out, where we understand how the connections in the brain and the weights of these connections, so how strong a connection is, and what the cell individually does. These three things together, probably as much as we understand it right now, make you and make me. This is where memories comes from. Like, this is where personality comes from. This is where identity comes from, and so on. All of that stuff is being kept around. And of course, I'm simplifying a bit. There's a lot of open questions still that need to be figured out, right? This is not something that will work in 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years. But if I'm getting cancer tomorrow, and my choices are, I can, incurable cancer. My choices are, I can either be cremated or buried, or I can be cryopreserved. At the very least, the chance of being cryopreserved, being brought back at some point, is higher than burial or cremation. So that's the strongest statement I'm willing to say on stages, but I think I'm pretty confident on that point, right? And how much better, there's scientists that say it's like minusculely better, and others say, well, it's, I don't know, it's 80%. So the range is very, very big, and they're both good scientists. So I would say it's definitely better than cremation or burial. Next slide, please. So, and then at some point, there's a long book was released by a nanotechnology expert in the US, how you would do revival, right? And the right side is, probably can't be read by at least not the people in the back. This is basically the counter-argument to the argument, well, I don't want to be woken up in a future that might be super dystopian, like all the science fiction movies I've looked at, right? And the important point here is, every of these curves goes in the right direction. There's less people living under the poverty line, there's more people living in democracies, there's less people, dying during childbirth, and so on. So if you just zoom out a bit and don't look at the last 10 years, right, of course this is a zigzag line, humanity is getting better and better and better, right? You just need to zoom out a bit. There's no time in history where I would say I would rather switch back to that time. I would argue there's good arguments to be made. Again, a bit of a zigzag line, but this is the best century I would, like to live in. All right, next slide. So this is the institute in Switzerland. So if anybody of you is interested, feel free to talk to me. Right, this is a real thing. You can sign up. Right, we do this on a regular basis. Of course, it's still like an early adopter market. This is not a mainstream thing yet, but arguably it might be. Next slide, please. And this is the 3 things that we're trying to work on. Make the quality better. As I said, there's a lot of research still to be done, like tremendous amounts of research, right? Then make it more accessible. Make it available for, currently we only cover Europe, make it available for everybody in the world. And then unfortunately, as everything in medicine, initially it's pretty expensive, right? You can fund it with insurance, we work with large insurance companies and so on. But one of my big pet peeve is that we want to make it significantly more affordable, like by an order of magnitude. To make it affordable for everybody. Next slide, please. And if anybody's interested to talk about these topics more, we're hosting a dinner in the next days, so if anybody wants to talk more about longevity and so on, feel free to register. I'm not sure if I can accommodate everybody because we have a bit of limited seating, but we're going to try, so feel free to register. And until further, I hope that no one gets any incurable disease anytime soon. And if you want to quotation marks protect against that, talk to us. I'm more than happy to tell you more how cryopreservation might help.
Thank you very much, Emil. So we've got time for one question, but I can't help but share on Slido that someone is asking someone out for some coffee. So if you want to see, it might be for you. If you're wearing shorts, the message might be for you. So check out Slido. So the top question for you, Emil, is what are we going to do with all these extra people?
Sure. So think about it, right? If I do my job tremendously well, then maybe 1 million people are going to sign up in the next few decades, right? I'm going to be very happy with that, right? Let's assume currently worldwide a couple thousand people have those contracts, right? So let's say I do my job, and even if it's 10 million, right? Currently the prediction is that we're going to level off at around 11 billion, right? So if we're adding 1 million people in the future, that's less than 0.1%. It's absolutely negligible how many additional people, at least with that technology, will be around in the future. And then again, even if it becomes not negligible at some point, in my moral framework, it's an individual's choice if it's technologically possible, if they want to be around, how long they would like to live, right? So even if, in quotation marks, the future might need to figure out new technologies, then I think it would still be the right thing if people say, hey, I want to do this for myself. Right? But currently, we're far, 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 far away from that the future is going to have any problem with 1 million extra people because it's a negligible amount.